Dr. Bible is a family physician born into a family of physicians. Her parents warned her not to pursue medicine, but she followed her heart only to discover to heal her patients, she has to first heal her profession. So she held town hall meetings and invited her community to design their own ideal clinic. Open since 2005, Dr. Bible's community clinic has sparked a movement in which patients and physicians are designing ideal clinics nationwide. When not treating patients, Dr. Bible devotes her life to medical student and physician suicide prevention. She runs a suicide hotline and hosts retreats for discouraged medical students and physicians, for which TEDMed has named her the Physician's Guardian Angel. Dr. Bible has personally compiled and investigated more than 1,300 doctor suicides and has analyzed the data for high-risk specialties and actionable solutions to prevent future deaths. Dr. Bible is the author of Physician Suicide Letters Answered. Her blogs have been picked up by major media such as the Washington Post and Time magazine. She has been interviewed by most major TV networks and is a frequent guest on NPR. She's featured in the documentary Do No Harm that exposes our hidden physician suicide epidemic. So put your hands together to welcome Dr. Bible to the stage.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm really excited that originally I was on the schedule the last day of your event, and then they moved me up to the middle day, and now with the late night phone call I got in my hotel room last night, I'm your first speaker. How about that? I got promoted. So we're going to talk about the culture of wellness through a really interesting lens that I feel like is not discussed because it's a bit of a taboo topic, but it's going to give you a lot of insight on how to move forward with an actual strategy that will be effective at creating a culture of wellness. So take the journey with me. We're going to start with physician mental health. This is a quote that I gave during an interview that got a lot of traction online, so I'll just read. If you're in a coal mine and your canary dies, you don't take deep breaths and do resiliency modules online. You get out of the coal mine. Now, in this quote, there's two tactics that have been used to deal with the obvious despair that exists within our profession. Meditation yoga on one side, let's just kind of sweep this up here, and maybe if we just took a nap and took a green drink, right? Then on the other side, there's like early retirement, I gotta get out of here, right? So, because I talk to a lot of surgeons and surgeons' wives and spouses, husbands, who tell me that their partner is counting down the days to retirement, trying to make an early exit. So somewhere between the early exit and meditation is an actual solution. That's a real strategy. And so we're going to discuss that today, and I think you'll find some relief in the fact that I am a truth speaker, so I don't hold anything back, but I am delivering this with great love for my profession and to save lives of my colleagues. So the learning objectives today are to learn a targeted, high-yield set of actions you can implement to promote wellness among physicians today. And this does not require you to sit in committee meetings or get any approval from anyone. You can actually leave this lecture and do it right away, right now, because I'm a very action-oriented person, for those of you who've read any of my blogs and know me. Also, we're going to understand how to create a culture of wellness utilizing a concept I call institutional triage, which I coined just for your conference. And I think you'll be able to relate to it. And then discover the highest risk specialties for suicide and what you can do to stop the crisis. Now, interesting, while I was putting these slides together, I actually got this email. Hello, Dr. Bible. I'm a general surgery resident, and I heard about your book from a friend. I wanted to thank you for advocating for a group of us who don't have a voice. I'm okay right now that I've experienced different types of harassment and suicidal thoughts in training. Very interesting that I would get that as I'm loading the slides up. So, I have a question for you. I know you have a little book that you can jot some notes in. I would encourage you to get that out and a pen and start to contemplate some of these deeper emotional concepts I'm going to bring up. But my first question, which you would know better than me because I didn't survive a surgical residency. I did family medicine, which was awesome, in Tucson, Arizona. Great to be home. By the way, I'm also a Texan. Grew up in Texas. So the question I have is, what unique occupational hazards would lead a surgery resident to experience suicidal thoughts? And I just want to give you some time, maybe 30 seconds, 60 seconds, whatever, to write, maybe 90 seconds, to write some things down, one or two thoughts, that's unique to a surgery resident or a resident in general. You can write that down privately in your book. You could also use your type pad and submit this so that it can be read anonymously, potentially. And then I have a follow-up question. I'm just going to give you some time to think about this. Because surgery residents are reaching out to me for help, and they're not reaching out to one another, and not necessarily to you for help. So that's odd. I'm in Oregon, and I'm a family doc, right? So I think you all have a lot of insight on this. I would like you to mine the insight that you have on this topic. And then a second question that I have is, have you ever known of a medical student or physician who has died by suicide? And please write that name down to honor this person's memory. There's an interesting, I'm going to let you sit with this for a minute, and I'm going to tell you the story of an orthopedic surgeon who died by suicide in my town of Eugene, Oregon. I have a registry where I collect data and names and investigate these and try to figure out why these people made this fatal decision. And I had moved to Eugene in '96. I didn't really know about this guy until recently. And I was trying to figure out, okay, wait, there's an orthopedic surgeon from '96. I thought certainly living in a small town, I should be able to track down some people who knew him personally, interview them, find out a little bit more about him. I found myself on the phone with a number of retired orthopedic surgeons and other surgeons in my town, asking them about this particular gentleman. And they said, oh, he's a tall, friendly guy, he always came to meetings, we didn't detect anything, took us by surprise, But what was interesting, this gentleman, a retired surgeon, called me the next morning, and he said, Pam, I've really been thinking about the conversation we had last night, and I just want to let you know 5 more names that popped up of doctors in our county that have died by suicide, just to make sure they're on your list. This happens over and over again. I'll talk to somebody about one suicide, and because I'm so accessible, non-judgmental, sort of opening a portal into them retrieving material from the past, something that I call suicide amnesia, right? Where these things are too difficult to think about, so you just pile them into a secret vault, but when somebody then asks you, tell me about a suicide, here comes 5 more. Like my roommate in medical school, the intern, during my interview, there was an intern that just stepped off the roof, right? So there's these memories. So I'm encouraging you right now to retrieve some of this and at least write down the names or, the intern when I started died, I didn't know her, that sort of thing. So this is the book, this is the second book that I wrote called Physician Suicide Letters. This is free, a free audiobook. If you like the sound of my voice, I can lull you to sleep by reading suicide letters by doctors. I know that sounds like a terrible bedtime story, but I want you to know that these are letters from doctors who actually, by and large, survived their contemplation of suicide. So these are people on the edge who wrote me kind of going through the pros and cons. I'm thinking of ending it, but, I don't want to do it for this reason, or should I, they're actually very insightful into the psychology of the decision-making that goes into whether somebody would end their life as a physician. So I would encourage you, it's on Amazon, but if you want a free copy, there you go, on my website. And then I want to mention why, I know this sounds very depressing. What a depressing way to start a conference. You start with a suicide speaker. Terrible, right? But I think through this lens, we're going to make the most progress and have a lot of release and relief and really bond and create the type of conversations that will be so meaningful for the remainder of this event. So this term, institutional triage, is a term I came up with because, we triage patients who come in, right? If you come in with a mangled lower extremity, we're not going to focus on your cholesterol right now. We're going to start with, airway, breathing, circulation, major fracture there. So what I'm suggesting we do is apply those same concepts that you already use as amazing surgeons to save lives to the institution of medicine. If we prioritize addressing institutional issues such as suicide, I bet downwind from that, we will create a culture that's really well, that has the potential to be well. So this is from a chapter in the book. I'll just read it to you. I'm going to share 2 quotes from the book. Sometimes I can still hear those attendings in my head saying things like, watching you operate is like watching a retarded monkey. Or do they even teach anatomy at your med school? Our students know more than you. It's paralyzing. I am reaching out to you for 2 reasons. I'm interested in eradicating the abuse in medical education. I'd like to have a career in academics and to influence policy regarding the treatment of trainees. More importantly, can you help me make the flashbacks stop? I really need for people to understand that some of the ways that we've trained surgeons traditionally since 1889 leave lifelong psychological effects in people that are very detrimental. So please realize your words are very powerful as a mentor. And when you say something like, I'm proud of you, like that could stick for somebody's life. And if you say, that was stupid, that could also stick, in somebody's head and replay over and over again. I want to share with you the most disturbing sentence that's ever come to me in an email. Thousands of people who are struggling in suicidal medicine have written me, this happens to be the most disturbing sentence, which created a lot of profound thinking on my part. But a medical student wrote me and said I was less stressed in Afghanistan than medical school. That's pretty dramatic. I felt like I needed to call this woman up and find out what she meant. Why is this? And here's what she told me. And she's in active warfare with landmines, sniper fire. How could medical training be worse than that? Well, during the first few missions, I was scared for my life. After that, I became numb to the fear and just focused on making sure I was able to save my guys' lives if we were attacked. The stress was incredible, but I had their back and they had mine. In an unsafe country and in a future filled with uncertainty, I felt secure because we supported each other. And that is really key. There's a feeling of safety because you have 100% trust in your team. If you're blown to smithereens by a landmine, you know that your people are going to pick your body parts back up and you're going to be honored back in America with a flag open. Your parents are going to be there, going to blow the bugle, whatever they do for the, you're going to have an honorable end and not just be left. In medicine, because this has unfortunately been set up in a pyramidal structure by William Halsted in 1889 with the first surgical residency, it's more like a gladiator fight. Like, who's going to survive and we're going to compete against each other. And I think that does long-term psychological, that creates terror in people that have panic attacks and they decompensate and don't have normal lives afterwards. So, I want to compare the military and medicine in the way that we are with one another. So in the military, there's a common enemy. Everyone knows who it is. It's the other side, and they're wearing different outfits, right? Okay, in medicine, there's the enemy that's the disease, right? We want to like eradicate the disease, fix the fracture, save the patient's life. But also, depending on your residency, the enemy may be your peers. You know, in med school, you're all competing to get into orthopedic surgery residency, so you got to get a higher score than this one. And, you know, like, it is a competition against each other. Terrible model of training for sensitive people that are humanitarians who want to serve others. To put them in a gladiator fight is not good. The language of war, obviously, is used in the military, but you might have noticed that we use war metaphors quite a lot in medicine. I think we should really change that into more compassionate language for the benefit of everyone, the patient overhearing us, your colleagues, right? Teamwork in military, you know these people have your back. In medicine, it's about turf wars. You know, I even have psychiatrists that are upset with me because I'm handling the physician suicide crisis the way I am. Well, they feel somehow threatened. Why is she doing this? This is stay in your lane, your family medicine, do strep throat, UTIs, we'll handle the doctor's suicide. It's like, well, you're not making much progress. We've known about this since 1858 in the UK. It's 162 years later. I just decided to take charge, you know? So, but this sort of physician infighting has caused third parties to come swoop in and take over our whole profession. Like, we need to be a solid team to prevent ourselves from being taken advantage of by unsavory forces, MBAs and others. I mean, nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying there's people who have divergent ethics who've swooped into our whole profession and taken charge of us. Collaboration is in the military. You certainly are collaborating, and you want to save each other's lives. In medicine, it's competition. And then, so in the military, there's a culture of trust. Unfortunately, in medicine, there's a culture of distrust. I think we need to get this head on. Now, to create a culture of wellness, essentially what I'm talking about is that we, beyond lip service, like truly collaborate and break out of the competition model. It's not working. These are some things that I would suggest, that we eradicate teaching by terror. There's nothing wrong with pimping if it's done in a humane way because you're really trying to help somebody learn, but malicious pimping and threats and personal insults, that's terrible, right? I mean, there's an actual communication technique called nonviolent communication. That would be a really cool thing to teach at a conference or have a 1-hour session at your hospital. You can go to cnvc.org and it helps us have a communication style that makes other people feel safe. And actually, even better, they'll be able to hear what you're saying and not go into an internal panic attack, right? So since we're all working for the same cause to save the patient, I think communication is key, and having strategies like ways of expressing yourself where you can be heard without scaring the other person is really important. And also expressing appreciation through personal action. Again, this isn't waiting for a top-down, we're going to be nice on Tuesdays and everyone send love notes to each other. This is like you doing something personally for somebody else because you feel called at your heart and soul to say, Joe, you did a great job today. I saw how you handled that patient and a difficult family, and that's changed the way I'm going to communicate with families from now on. There's things that you witness and others that you want to emulate. Let them know, wow, that was really powerful, the way you described this process to the patient or to the medical student. That changed the way I looked at this disease, right? So I have a question for you all to contemplate, is what specifically can you do to create a culture of collaboration in your medical institution? Just take a minute, maybe something I've said has sparked an idea. Now I'm just going to let you all sit with this for a moment. And if you'd like to please type this in your type pad and submit this, we could maybe share some of them at this point. So I know you all have really great ideas. I mean, that's the beauty of talking about this and telling the truth, is that we have the intellect and the resourcefulness just in this room to change surgical training culture, which then can be modeled by other residencies and other, family medicine.
So Dr. Marvel, there is a request to give an example.
An example. Yes, I am going to give many examples in here. One example that I'm going to focus on at the end is just as simple as it sounds, giving thank you notes to people. Physicians really like to read, you might have noticed, and if you give somebody, like, hey Joe, if you give somebody some appreciation verbally, I mean, that's great. Don't hold back. However, we've got almost like an emotional moat around us because of this culture of distrust. It's hard. I don't know if you've ever felt this way when somebody says something loving to you, like it's hard to really let it in, especially if you're busy and you're going on to the next case. If somebody compliments you, it's like you don't pause enough to like take it in and get a little tear in your eye. Like you don't pause. So actually writing it down and telling somebody in verbal and written form allows that person to read and reread that over and over again, because doctors tend to save their thank you notes. So that would create a feeling of, wow, I'm appreciated. A lot of physicians don't feel appreciated. I don't know if you've noticed that. By each other, sometimes by patients, by administration. Anything else that anyone would like to share? I'm going to go into that in more detail later.
Yeah, so we've quite a few examples here. Entertain ideas more readily and openly from residents and others. Treat trainees as peers. Create a culture of collaboration. Off-site social activities, scheduled and spontaneous. Listen to one another. Provide positive feedback. Create a communication culture. And multidisciplinary fracture settings.
So when you say listen to the residents more, I have a great example of what you can do with residents that's so much fun. So in my introduction, you heard that I did town hall meetings and I encouraged my community in Lake County, Oregon to design their ideal medical clinic, right? Because that's one thing, and I learned how to technically be a physician and prescribe, the right med for strep throat, UTIs, and all that jazz, but nobody taught me like how to actually run a clinic in a way that's truly patient-centric. And I believe in putting the end user in charge. I believe medical students should design their ideal medical school. I believe residents should design their ideal residency, not wait for the HCGME to dictate all these things, or at least collaborate so that it's not just a top-down, here's how we're going to train you, okay? So one thing that I did just spontaneously when I was speaking to residents, I think it was a family medicine residency, is I just took some time, they passed out paper and pen, and I said, hey, if you could be in charge here, if you could be program director of your program, design your ideal residency. If you could be king for the day or queen for the day. They were nonstop writing all sorts of ideas. The program director was like jaw to the floor. I can't believe you're getting this level of engagement. And then they started sharing, I think because I'm a neutral person that wasn't evaluating them, right? They were willing to share with me, and somebody actually asked them their opinion. And the residency director was writing furiously all their ideas down, and these are things that they could implement that week. I mean, it's not a mystery. The problem is we haven't asked the end user to be engaged and mind them for the incredible resourcefulness and intellect that they have in designing, let's just say, their ideal AO, designing their ideal surgical residency, designing their ideal clinic. These are intelligent people that should be treated like adults and not infants, and allowed to take some major role in creating what's going to work for them. So I want to talk a bit about physician mental health wounds, which are generally, from that Afghanistan example, caused by competition. So collaboration, when we truly collaborate beyond lip service, there is a feeling of unification and like that we're a family and we're all in this together. When we're in competition, that creates isolation. And people don't feel safe to share anything. They don't feel safe to share a failure that they have with a patient or even admit that something got screwed up. They don't feel safe to share their emotions with one another. This is another quote from the book. I definitely graduated from med school with PTSD. We were so beaten down on our clinical rotations. I almost dropped out after the first week of my first rotation in surgery. It takes a lot for me to break down and cry, but I think I cried at least once a week on that rotation, 12 weeks of hell, along with everyone else. But we hid it from each other, of course. That is a key line there. People are experiencing things that they're actively hiding from one another. And I want to show you a picture of what emotional isolation looks like. This is an actual photo of an emergency physician outside of a Southern California hospital who just lost a 19-year-old patient. This paramedic snapped a photo with permission. They posted this online. This thing was going viral in 2015. And of course, so he's crouching down, against a cement wall and crying by himself outside of a parking lot, and then having to go back in and see the next patient. So, the part that most people fail to realize is this man now has to compose himself, walk into another person's room, and introduce himself with a smile and handshakes. Not much time to debrief there. So I'm going to leave this picture up for a minute and give you the opportunity to see what comes up for you as you're staring at this picture. Just jot down, maybe you felt this way. Maybe you've cried secretly in the bathroom or a stairwell or, This is a real scene that plays out every day in most human beings that witness something traumatic. And if you'd like to type anything in your keypad about a feeling or a thought that you have as you're looking at this picture, we could hear anonymously anything that wells up in you.
Yeah, so we just have a couple of comments that says they've been there, both professionally and for personal reasons.
So these are some quotes. When this was going viral online, I believe this was from Reddit or Facebook or something. When it comes to our work, nothing is harder, and I mean nothing, than telling a loved one that their family member is dead. Give me a bloody airway to intubate. Give me the heroin addict who needed IV access yesterday, but no one can get an ID. Give me the child with anaphylaxis, but don't give me the unexpected death. We can only do so much, and we can only hope to do our best. But it's that moment when you stop resuscitation and you look around and you look down at your shoes to make sure there's no blood on them before talking with the family. You put your coat back on and you take a deep breath because you know that you have to tell a family that literally the worst thing imaginable has happened. And it's in that moment that I feel, and I feel like the guy in this picture. If you can relate to that and you want to share anything about that anonymously.
So I have a few more comments. Sometimes it's what you need to have a moment alone in your grief when you are otherwise surrounded by people all day. Empathy, been there. Unnatural compensations that occur to be able to forge on. Cannot show you are weak. I lost a very young patient. I had to tell the parents, the mother's wail still haunts me.
So people who have experienced this in sort of a form of almost carrying the PTSD back to the flashback side earlier on, they can't stop seeing the face of the mother. They can't stop, you're viscerally experienced this, like the blood, the last breath, the calling off the code, like even if you don't want to intellectually sort of remember it, like it's in your body, and the scream of the parent, these don't go away. And so what I'm suggesting is that we heal. You can't sort of just meditate your way out of it or have a green drink or something. These are well-intended wellness maneuvers that I think some organizations are trying to create a nice environment for us, but what I'm suggesting we do is actually heal, triage, get to the root issue, which is that, quite honestly, we've experienced vicarious trauma, which is vicarious trauma, very important if you're not familiar with it. I think we're all suffering from this, especially in surgery and anesthesia and veterinary medicine, which is the emotional impact of physician exposure to traumatized people, most often as they are hearing trauma histories and become witness to the pain, fear, and terror patients have endured. Like, you're actually traumatized by that too. So there's a sentence I really like called hurt people hurt people. Now, this isn't because we're mean. You know, some people say, oh, surgeons are mean and then are aloof. Or, you know, these are people who are hurt and professional distance and everything else. And you start to inadvertently wound other people if you're wounded. I mean, that's just kind of what human beings do. You get stuck in a cycle like that. And so I would encourage us to handle the hurt. We're going to kind of have some really simple things that we can do today to really deal with this. Another quote here, I had to go from ensuring a patient continues to breathe to a room full of angry people because grandma wanted a Tylenol and the call light has been on for 10 minutes, and we're going to another hospital and we want another doctor, and this place is getting a call to the administration. I'm going to call a lawyer, and I'm calling Channel 6 News, and we know so-and-so, and he's going to hear about this, and health, you know, so healthcare is a life of fighting, defending yourself, sacrificing yourself, working weekends, missing holidays. Sometimes things like losing a patient makes you want to throw up your hands and say, fuck it, I'm out. But you can't. You do it because you love it. You do this thankless and unappreciated job because you want to. I can't believe I'm six-figure debt. Gave up the nights and weekends of my 20s so I could voluntarily do it, but I couldn't see myself doing anything else. Can anyone relate to this quote? I mean, just, I don't know, raise your hand if you feel like you can relate to this. Feel free to send anything through your type pad that you'd like to share about these quotes. I promise I'm not going to leave you in a state of misery. This is going to be very uplifting at the end. This is part of healing. This is kind of like doing an emotional I&D. You know what I mean? Like, get it out. Get the pus out. Anything you want to share? Good? Okay. So vicarious trauma, you receive this when you hear patients' stories of trauma. You are traumatized. Even if you don't think you are, you are. Witnessing patients suffering and dying, that's traumatic. Most people wouldn't even want to read a book about what you see and do every day. It's too traumatizing. Experiencing medical errors, even if they're not your fault. Someone else's fault. Like you know, people replay these scenes. If I would have done it this way, if I would have taken this approach, if I would have started this procedure earlier. Exposure to traumatized colleagues. You know, we're all, if you think about it, we're all suffering from vicarious trauma. We're all going to work today in the same medical institution. We're all trying our best, but we're all suffering silently, together, packed in close in these buildings. With people that are in charge that are not doctors, unfortunately, and they don't understand what we're going through, and we don't even reveal it to each other. So it's just kind of a mess that way. So here we go. I know what this person is feeling. Yesterday, one of my 17-month-old patients died. I was in the bathroom crying in private between patients several times yesterday. I've cried in stairwells and hallways. It eats at you. Life is very fragile, and the pain of losing those we are trying to help becomes a scar that doesn't go away. It has shaped who I am as a person. So, to create a culture of wellness, culture actually determines our trauma response. We tend to respond, medicine is an apprenticeship profession, so we see how other people are responding to trauma, and then we do the same thing. So if they just shut down emotionally and go to the next patient, then we just shut down emotionally and go to the next patient. If nobody's talking about it, then we're not going to talk. No one wants to be the first one to talk about it. So these are some things that we can do that are very easy. We could have like a recovery room for doctors and hospital staff. There's probably a room closet in every hospital that's not being utilized. Turn that into a recovery room. You know, patients have their recovery room. What about a recovery room for doctors? And you know how many chaplains have called me over the years saying, I want us to help doctors who are suicidal. What can I do? Well, you know, the doctor called you to help the family that lost the infant, but, you know, maybe after you have a conversation with them, you could have a confidential conversation with the doctor that just saw the infant die and had to tell the family, you know. So it's like we already have staff in the hospital that are willing to listen to us with empathy and love. They're called chaplains. And why don't we create a scenario where we're willing to receive help from chaplains without being punished, without it going on an electronic medical record, going to a psychiatrist and all this stuff, right? That's one thing that we could easily do. Peer-to-peer support, which is sort of what I'm suggesting that we do for the rest of this conference. If anything that I say up here resonates with you, you might have a conversation with somebody about something that you're feeling as a result of this talk. Ballot groups are a really interesting way to do it, where you discuss a patient case related to your own emotions around it. You can look it up. It's a structured form of sort of almost like group therapy for surgeons without calling it group therapy. The Vet Confessional Project, I'm going to share a little bit about that, which is really cool. Has anyone heard about the Vet Confessional Project? So awesome, very easy. My solutions, by the way, are no-cost solutions. They don't cost anything, and they can be done right away. Confidential mental health care, I think, is essential for physicians and trauma-informed care. So I want you to look at a picture here. This is actually a wall in my home business office. These are some of the 1,363 doctor suicides that I've investigated, and been on the phone with their families, and listened to the mom crying on the phone that lost her only child in medical school. As you're looking at this photo, which is obviously, you know, it's painful to look at the faces of beautiful doctors that didn't get to fulfill their career aspirations. Some didn't even make it out of medical school or residency. I want us to take a moment to honor a man that you lost as an orthopedic surgeon recently. On September 17th last year, we lost Thomas Fischler. Does anyone know Tom Fischler? Okay. He died, actually, it's so strange. The 17th of September is National Physician Suicide Awareness Day. That's when he died. And so, to remember him and take a moment. If there's anyone else that you lost that you'd like to remember at this time, just honor. These are valuable people who've contributed so much, and they deserve to be celebrated for their contributions. Another gentleman I want to bring up is Stephen Ortiz. Does anyone know who Stephen Ortiz is? A spine surgeon. 3 years ago today, he decided to die by suicide. In the late hours of 3 years ago, this evening, he checked on his patients in the hospital in Florida, and then went out to the parking lot and shot himself in the heart around 2 in the morning. And another wonderful orthopedic surgeon. So this is a little graph of the numbers of cases by specialty that have come to me just organically, because I have a suicide helpline and people just submit organically names to me over the last 7.5 years. You can see that surgeons are in the lead with just raw numbers, and then anesthesiologists. But what's more important is the next slide, which is if you do a calculation based on numbers of active physicians per specialty, you can start to see that anesthesiologists are far in the lead and surgeons are number 2. Anesthesiologists are dying 5.7 times the suicide rate of general internal medicine, 2.2 times the suicide rate of surgeons. I mean, none of this is not anything to sneeze at. I mean, this is some serious stuff. And so we're going to talk about how to stop this from happening again. And if anyone has any thoughts along the way, if there's anything you want to submit, type to Trev, feel free to do that. Here are some lessons I learned. The physician suicide is actually a public health crisis. That more than 1 million Americans lose their physicians every year to suicide. And I feel like it should be handled as if it's a crisis. Most doctors have lost a colleague to suicide. Some have written me and told me they've lost 8 colleagues to suicide. Late intervention is less effective. I interviewed several male physicians who survived suicide, and they say between the time when they decided they were going to die by suicide and actually grabbed the gun or took the knife or the pills or whatever, 3 to 5 minutes. So see, if we wait until very late, the heroic moves you'd have to make to save somebody in the last 3 to 5 minutes would have to be extreme. So I'm suggesting that we get ahead of this. Just so you know, you might have noticed for the names that have come up to you, Tom, particularly Steve Ortiz, checking in on his patient just before he died, like nobody saw it coming. These people have a great work ethic until their last breath, which is why we don't know, and we're shocked when it happens. We die to end our pain, not because we want to die, but we don't see any other way out. And anesthesiologists and veterinarians are likely the top 2 groups, and surgeons are number 2. So, to create a culture of wellness, specifically for the people that AO serve, I want you to know, it seems as if, from an outsider, a family doc's perspective, the greatest trauma exposure likely happens in your specialty. Oh no, how do I go back? Okay. You, I believe, are the most overworked and sleep deprived, maybe OBGYN too. Easiest access to painless lethal means. So I think this scenario puts you at highest risk. But we're going to do a little institutional triage here. Because before we can create a culture of wellness, we need to diagnose what is most unwell and treat it first. This is another book that I recently wrote because I analyzed these 1,363 cases. And as a scientist, you're looking for patterns. So I saw some patterns of things that people would repeat over and over again, that's throwing them into this desperate realm. And so I identified 41 different, this root cause analysis, human rights violations, because to keep somebody up 72 hours or whatever, 36 hours, not let them sleep, that's like a torture technique that's used in war. Bullying, sexism, harassment, the fact that we can't get mental health care without feeling like our confidentiality is going to be breached, we're going to lose our license. Corruption, that's actually what killed Stephen Ortiz, is corruption. He was working for a hospital system that actually incentivized him not to give surgical care to patients. And before that, he had another job that incentivized him to over-deliver surgical care to patients. And so the conundrum of being in corrupt hospital systems tears at your heart to the point where you go out and shoot yourself in the heart in a hospital parking lot, discrimination, exploitation, retaliation. Okay, so we're going to now switch to the optimistic part of the talk. But I just wanted you to see that it's really important to recognize the depth of our suffering and not just say, let's all meditate. We have some suffering.
Yes. I think I have 2 interesting comments and a question that I wanted to share. So someone said, I remind myself that if I influence one patient positively each day, then it is life well lived. Shit happens, but you gotta go on. And another interesting comment, we are actors overwhelmed with the act. We have to remember this is just an act. And there's a question for you. Are you aware of studies that compare doctor suicides globally?
Globally? Yeah, I don't know globally. I can just look at the cases that come in India is very high. I couldn't say. Some of this is just very well hidden. We're still calling some suicides accidental overdoses, which is an interesting thing to say that a physician can do because we certainly know the power of what we're taking. We're not a toddler playing with pink pills on the bathroom floor. So I think a lot of times, and of course the person filling out the death certificate might be your friend in a small town, and what are they going to maybe say it's an accident so your spouse will get the life insurance payout? There's a lot of things culturally going on here that cover this whole thing up. So we don't really have accurate data, and certainly globally. So I've had people write me from Nigeria saying no suicides ever happen in Nigeria. There's a cultural feeling like this doesn't happen in our country, it's just in the US. So again, we're shielded in secrecy, but there are simple actions we can take today. And I want to say what the actions are not. Now, these are well-meaning things that people have done, but these are not the solution to what's going to help us create a culture of wellness. This is an actual thing that they did in the military where they had them color in adult coloring books. They had to sign up. These are doctors. who have patients waiting. You can see screaming in the background there. But they thought it would be good to have a mandatory wellness day, and everyone got to pick their adult coloring book and coloring rainbows and stuff. But, that's actually not a targeted treatment for what ails us. And by the way, neither is burnout, which I cannot stand that word, or moral injury. I don't like that word either, because this is not a definitive diagnosis, Moral injury, probably who's heard of moral injury? Moral injury, it's circulating around, right? That's like if I called you from an emergency room and said, hey, I got a leg injury in here. And you said, well, what's going on? And I said, I don't know, leg injury. Like, is that going to be enough information for you to start making a decision? That could be anything from a sprained ankle to a displaced femur. Like, what is that? I don't know. Moral injury, so nebulous it means nothing. There's no treatment plan attached to it. I'm talking about let's take action today with a definitive diagnosis and a treatment plan, right? And not stay in nebulous territory. What's creating the nebulous territory? Well, we'd like to be in denial about the extent of the problem because it's sometimes too hard to talk about. But staying in denial about a fractured femur doesn't allow you to move forward with the treatment. So this is something that was well-meaning, did not work. Also, I went to an AMSA convention where they recommended survived residency. You just have to take up swing dancing. There was a whole lecture on swing dancing. I think if we had free time, we'd probably naturally go out dancing. You know what I mean? But this is not going to help the situation we're in. Keeping a gratitude journal. Boy, that sounds like fun. But how's that going to help with vicarious trauma and the pain if you just lost an infant? You know what I mean? So, meditation and yoga, all right. I'm just saying these are well-meaning but not targeted treatments. Looking for a targeted treatment. Like sleep deprivation. What's the treatment? A pillow. Hypoglycemia for 36 hours. Food, dinner. There's actual treatments that are, okay. A psychiatrist at a conference said that her solution for burnout was to start running marathons. And she was telling everyone, teaching the doctors how to set goals. It's like, wait a minute. We already know how to set goals. We need to do med school and, doing more activities that are not emotionally healing the real wound isn't necessarily going to help. Either is a whole bunch of wellness lectures. So what I'm talking about that we can do that's targeted treatment to create a culture of wellness is, I'm going to talk about two things on this slide which I previously presented. One is the vet confessional, which I think is awesome, and how to actually have confidential mental health care. So I did a study this summer with an intern. It took me it was 3 or 4 months. We went through every state's medical licensing application, the initial licensing application. We pulled out all the non-ADA discriminatory questions on mental health. And because physicians, they're not going to go seek help if Tom Fischler feels like by going to a psychiatrist or talking to a psychologist, that's going to go on his record, and he might lose his medical license. Very unlikely that he's going to do that, right? So we have to have confidentiality when we share our pain, right? And right now, medical boards are breaching our confidentiality, which is illegal under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Yes, they need to find out if you're competent to practice medicine, but it's none of their business if you have postpartum depression or having a marriage and going to marriage therapy. That shouldn't be discoverable by the board. So applications for medical liability insurance, insurance credentialing, hospital privilege applications, medical boards, they're often asking, have you ever had depression? Have you ever? It's none of their business. What you need to know is, are you capable of practicing medicine now? Are you competent now, right? This is an actual application from Alaska that's still being used, in which Alaska, this is the worst state, asks 25 yes or no mental health questions. Does that seem extreme to anyone? I don't know. Does that seem extreme, right? Now, the best states, Connecticut, Hawaii, Michigan, and New York, ask no mental health questions. So there's precedent for doing this differently. And I want to share how one man made a huge difference. This was an anesthesiologist who essentially, to cut to the chase, had to basically was asked for a peer reference on another anesthesiologist, okay? He saw there was a have you ever had question on there. He circled it and said, this is creating stigma. There's a, I would request that you change the way you're asking these. This came from a hospital credentialing committee, right? He said that this is not a question that's helpful, right? Now, the hospital credentialing committee, the doctor in charge there, actually wrote back to him and removed the question. I think people sometimes don't realize these questions, which we can just remove from our applications in our departments and our hospitals, will make people feel safer to get the care they need. So my question to you is, what action can you take or have you ever taken to protect physicians from being asked to disclose their confidential mental health treatment? Has anyone, just if you have an idea of how, some of you are in charge, some of you are on credentialing committees, I know. Some of you accept residents into your programs. Are you asking mental health questions that are against the Americans with Disabilities Act? This should be kind of a never event. There's no reason for us to go into this territory. And if you, Shidra, if you want to share anything that anyone has to say.
Yeah, there are quite a few questions for you here. If you want me to wait?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So is access to medication and addiction a factor?
Is access to medication?
And addiction a factor?
Yes, because substance abuse is often, basically that's a downwind response where you are coping by drinking alcohol at home, or sometimes, driving, there's doctors that drive 200 miles out of town to use a fake name and cash to get mental health care because they don't want to go sit at a psychiatrist's office, psychologist's office in their small town in Tulsa, Oklahoma, or wherever they are, and they drive out of town. That's like sneaking around to try to get screening colonoscopies. You know what I mean? It's putting us in a terrible situation. Yes, it is a huge factor. And the PHPs, which I can go into forever. There's a lot to say on this. And by the way, I'll be here the whole day. If anyone needs to have a private conversation with me, I'm going to be accessible. And obviously I have a passion for this topic.
How does compassion fatigue play into the cause of suicide?
So compassion, you're spent with compassion fatigue, like you have no emotional strength left. In fact, I interviewed a series of family docs and asked them, at what point in the day, after how many patients do you sort of stop caring? They're like, usually we have 28 patients a day or so we see in family medicine. They say at about 10. I just stop listening. I can't hear any more tragedies, So the last 2/3 of the patients you see per day are sort of getting only a portion of your attention span. So yes, compassion fatigue plays out daily, and it plays out over your lifetime. And then, honestly, you go home and you certainly don't want to hear your child complain or your spouse, and you're like, give me some alcohol. Let me get stoned. You're just thinking, what can I do?
Is suicide more a problem in affluent cultures?
Is suicide more a problem in affluent? Suicide in general among physicians more. I think there are children that get pushed into medicine and it's not their right profession in Asian cultures, by the way, and some Jewish families, be a doctor sort of a thing. And so those are affluent and non-affluent families. There's actually, sort of something that comes up to me is when there's been physicians that have died by suicide, and then I look in their family and every single other person in their family is a physician. So what goes through my mind is, did you pressure, that's like all having matching circumcisions, did you pressure them to look just like you and be in the same profession? It's, let people choose their own profession, So.
Just one last comment that probably you could react to. We've largely left unmentioned the impact of institutional productivity expectations cornering physicians into circumstances.
Right, so I think we're moving at speeds because of the EMR that are non-human speeds. We're moving at a high pace that we can't, our technology has outpaced our spiritual and emotional ability to keep up, and even our physical ability to keep up. But I want to share an inspiring answer here. This is called the Veterinary Confessionals Project, which they actually do at veterinary conferences, and there's an online forum where this is happening, where veterinarians can submit their confessions, kind of like going to a Catholic confessional thing, right? So I'm a vet without a pet, and intend to stay that way because probably compassion fatigue, right? Having to give so much care to my clients and pets, I have nothing left to care for another pet at home. Some of you probably feel that way with your home life, nothing left to give. These are anonymous confession boards for health professionals to share feelings and secrets. It's a creative outlet for self-expression without feeling judged because it's anonymous. And it fosters connection through shared experiences. This is actually targeted, like people are feeling pain and they have an anonymous outlet. If anyone has a secret they'd like to confess, send it through your typepad. We'll read it. And we're not going to know who sent it, right? It decreases isolation and shame. And there's an actual website you can go to if you're interested in this. It's free, like it would be just hanging up cards outside of a conference, having a little wall with Post-it notes. I'm going to read a few more. So, sometimes I am secretly thankful when an owner declines surgery and euthanizes because I'm too busy with other critical things. Am I a horrible person? I had a client who reported me to the state board for performing cat abortions. Really? Before I retire, I will utilize the following phrase talking to a client. Getting veterinary advice from a breeder is like getting gynecology advice from a pimp. I feel guilty about being successful, like somehow I don't deserve it. Anesthesia scares me. Will the odds catch up to me? You might have feelings like this. I'm going to take a moment here for you to send anything that you'd like to confess through your typepad this way, please, and see if you're willing to share. And I would encourage you to write some things down for yourself, get it off your chest, because carrying around, I feel guilty about being successful, or when will, anesthesia catch you. These are fears that you carry around every day, like in a backpack, and you're just walking around the rest of your life with these things on your back, and it's just good to get it out somehow, even anonymously.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions here. In the interest of time, I think there's one probably question that's been repeated here. How do you identify doctors at risk then?
That's the problem because of our, stay happy and smile, wear your white, we have to put on the game face every day. It's very hard. I would say anyone who's expressing any sort of struggle, you could probably increase that 10 times. And I think all of us have actually probably thought at some point, is this really worth it? Did I make the right decision? Am I in the right career? Maybe it would be easier to drive off the road into a tree. I think, in my personal opinion, most of us have probably at some point during medical training or beyond had some sort of passive suicidal thought creep in. Like, I wish I could trade places with my patient in hospice and get some rest. This is just from the numbers of people contacting me what seems. So until we start revealing our secrets randomly, anonymously on a confession board or on our diaries, or start talking to each other as peers, I think it's hard to make any progress. I would treat every doctor like they're a potential suicide case, right? And be like, Joe, it's great to see you. How are you doing? I haven't seen you in a while. Let's go to dinner. Let's talk. Just interact with each other as if there's a possibility this could be your last conversation. I know it's kind of a doomsday thing, but if we can get connected at the heart and soul, I think it'll really, really help people feel safe and willing to share. And the way to do this, because guys aren't going to hug each other and start crying, and like women, by the way, we have a lesser suicide rate, I think, because when we're feeling so upset, we start crying and we call our girlfriends up and we get it off our chest. I don't think that's how men respond. They have a gun and they just go, I'm going out in the back, and they shoot them. You know what I mean? That's what I notice. Men are it's the testosterone, the impulsivity, and the fact that they have access to lethal means. and they've just had it because their wife asked for a divorce or something happens. We're very compartmentalized. It only takes one little thing to push you over the edge. So I'm just suggesting that for men, what you might want to do is go fishing, go on a hike in the woods, and you be the first person to share some sort of secret. Like, hey, I've never shared this with anyone, but I feel safe. I'd like to share that, hey, I lost a patient 5 years ago. It still eats at me. If you go first, then probably the other guy will be like, that happened to me too in residency, and I'm still, I still see the face of the mother. I think you just have to start walking that path, and sharing it relieves people. One thing I want to say that I think is so very inspiring is people will write me these long emails about their tragedies, and at the end they'll say, I don't know if you're ever going to read this, but I feel so much better that I wrote this to you and got this off my chest. Don't worry about calling me back. I just feel such a relief that I wrote this down. So a question is, what do you think about starting a confessional project at your medical institution? Do you think, does that inspire anyone? It's very easy. Something you can think about doing. But the last thing I want to mention before I close is the value of appreciation. So I touched on this earlier, expressing appreciation to physicians through personal action. And basically what I'm talking about is just pretty much, like I said, take a physician out to dinner or lunch. Give a gift to a physician who's inspired you, a thank you card. Offer to take call for a physician. These are like very simple things you could do. But the simplest thing that I want to end with is just thank you notes. The value of telling somebody, hey, Mike, I saw what you did, and that really touched me. Even a text or a simple thank you card. And I want you to know that a thank you card, by the way, has actually prevented physician suicides. Okay? Having practiced medicine 45 years, it was always lifted up when patients thanked me. The number of people who've actually written me to tell me that a thank you card prevented their suicide is really quite a lot, And it's, this is a project that a teenager did on a bridge that she was about to jump from, and she decided not to, and she left little love notes on the bridge. People who also thought of jumping off the bridge found the notes, then found her and thanked her because that note saved them and prevented them from stepping off the bridge. This is as short as the thank you note needs to be. It looks like you had a hard day, Jim. It'll get better. I saw, I'm here for you. Something very simple can change somebody's entire life. It seems like unlikely, but it's really, really important. You have no idea how much a kind word can prevent a suicide. I'll go back. You want to take a picture? There we go. You don't have to even use love words or pink cards. You can just use blue for boys. I saw what you did, Jim, and you're a great guy. Whatever makes this palatable for you, but I'm encouraging you to do this because I keep every note for my patients. It has definitely prevented my suicide. There are days I want to give up, but I see the letters, thank you cards, even art, knitting, jewelry from patients, and I keep going. I'm reminded that my life is about more than my pain and suffering. The same sort of thing here. This is a female physician. But to close, my final slide, this is an actual text that prevented an ENT doctor's suicide. This is from another ENT doctor, a resident. Hey, I'm so sorry about your patient. That sucks. I'm very thankful that we have you as an excellent otolaryngologist to learn from. You take care of so many sick patients and do a marvelous job educating us how to do it safely, skillfully, and compassionately well. Thank you for that. So here's the text that prevented my suicide. This, you know how easy it is to send a text? That you don't even have to pick out a Hallmark card. This one text actually saved an ENT doctor's life, and I just want to sort of close there. I probably went over, but if you have any thoughts about any of this and how simple this really is, the one thing I'm going to leave you with, if you could just get in the habit of texting appreciation to one another, you will create a culture of wellness that will have ripple effects to no end. Simple. It's Simple, you don't have to wait for a committee meeting.
Yeah, I just have one comment here that I think is a useful thing that everybody can do. I personally thank by name every person in my op room before I leave at the end of the case.
Any other thoughts about the simplicity of some of this? I mean, really the revolution that we need culturally is from the inside out and the bottom up, which is why when a top-down mandate to do adult coloring books sort of doesn't really work. You know what I mean? Systems are just made up of people. As each one of us change our behavior with one another, the entire system changes. And it's very beautiful. It can happen quickly. So I would encourage each one of you for the rest of this conference to maybe share some authentic feeling with another person here and have a depth of conversation that's different than just comparing surgical techniques. You know, like, consider going into an emotional realm with each other for the next few days, just with one person. See how it feels. Check in with someone. Tell somebody you appreciate them. Maybe send a text back to some of the doctors stuck in the tornadoes and let them know how much you appreciate them even though they couldn't make it, or residents back home. I mean, that's my parting request, is just to start. The culture change starts in your heart and soul. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you. So thank you, Dr. Bible. So we are ready for a quick break, maybe 15 minutes.